Are you ready to run your first race? Maybe you've been running for a while and you're now feeling ready to give yourself a new challenge. Or maybe you've had friends or people in your running group who keep talking about racing and you're thinking, oh, this sounds like something I might want to give a go. If this sounds familiar, but maybe you're not quite sure what kind of race to pick or how to make sure that you're going to enjoy the race that you do pick, then do keep watching as I'm going to be sharing my top tips on choosing your first race. But first off, who am I? I'm Coach Nicola and I'm a running coach and women's fitness specialist. I created this channel to help runners get fitter, faster and stronger so that you can really enjoy your running, whether that's on the road or the trails. Over the years, I've coached many runners who are doing their first race, whether that's a 5K or a 10K or longer. And it's something I really enjoy. There's such a sense of achievement when you put in the training and then come race day, you do your race and you cross over that finish line. It's just fantastic. And so I'm going to share my tips with you on what I would look for when choosing your first race. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is about distance and the time it takes to train. So if you're a very new runner and you're looking at trying to do your first race, then look at the kind of 5K and 10K distances. They are really achievable for people. So if you are brand new to running, then a 5K is very achievable for you. A 10K might give yourself that little bit more of a challenge, but again, it's very achievable. If you have been running for a while, you might be thinking, oh, actually, I want to give myself a challenge of a half marathon. I already do sort of long runs of an hour or more, sort of an hour and a half or more, and I want to give myself that extra challenge of going for a race, and you might want to choose a half marathon. You might be thinking, actually, what I really want to do is a marathon. But I wouldn't say have that as your very, very first race. There's a lot that goes into marathon training, and I think doing a smaller race, or not necessarily smaller, but a shorter distance race, will give you a little bit of that training of what to expect on race day. So although there's absolutely nothing wrong with running a marathon as your big goal, I would suggest doing some smaller races before that, so maybe some 10Ks or half marathon races before you actually do the big marathon goal. So yeah, have your long-term goal as the marathon and then put in those races beforehand. So that's all I'm going to say about having a marathon as your first option. But the 5K and the 10K races are very achievable for most people. They don't take as much time for training as the half marathon or the marathon does. So it can really fit around kind of work commitments and family commitments. And then thinking about the distance that you're choosing, also think about how long you need to train for. Now, you might kind of see a race and go, oh, that looks fantastic, but it's only, in 3 weeks' time. Do I have enough time to train for that? Well, probably not. You're probably looking for something a little bit further away than that. So you want to look at races that are for a 5 or a 10K race. You want to look at races that are maybe 8 weeks or more further away from today. With a half marathon, you want to kind of think about 12 to 16 weeks, depending on what you're running now. And then with the marathon, bearing in mind what I said about trying the shorter races first, you want to be looking for at least sort of the 16-week to kind of 22-week mark for your training. So that's the kind of training period that you need for them. Again, it does depend on where you are now in your training and what kind of running that you already do, but that's just to give you a very sort of general idea. The second thing I want you to think about is location. Do you want to run somewhere near to you, or do you want to go somewhere else? The advantages of a race close to home is that it's close to home. Travel logistics probably won't be so much of an issue. You could probably get your friends and family to come along and be there at the finish line to cheer you across. So there's lots of benefits of being close to home, especially for your very, very first race. However, you might want to think, actually, I've always wanted to go to such and such a place and there's a race there, and being in that new location I think will give me a really good boost and just add to the whole experience. So there's absolutely, no sort of preference. I don't have a preference for one or the other. It's just something to consider and kind of work out what's best for you. For my first 5K and 10K races, I stayed pretty much close to home, sort of an hour's distance, maybe traveling, I think by train or by car, that kind of location, that kind of distance away from me. For my half marathon, I went to Birmingham, which was a good couple of hours away, and my mum and dad drove me up there, so I was very lucky in that respect. I didn't have to worry about driving there and back. And then for my first marathon, I went to Bournemouth, and that was actually a weekend trip, again with my parents, and my mum actually ran the marathon with me. We did our first marathon together, which was a great experience as well. So think about that, think about location and logistics. The second thing to think about is the route. Now, some races are going to be closed roads, and what that means is that there's absolutely no cars on there. The roads are closed to traffic. It's just going to be you and everyone else running that race. A lot of races, however, because there's a lot of expense and kind of logistics in doing that for the race organisers, a lot of races will be open roads, which means that there will be traffic around you. And the thing to think about that is that if it's an open road race, you won't be able to wear headphones. Some races will say you can wear bone conducting headphones, but you can't wear sort of in the ear or over the ear headphones. So if you're somebody who loves to run with music and you think, I don't think I could run without music, and I don't think I could run without a race without music, then making sure that you choose a closed road race or somewhere that is sort of on a private property where they allow the headphones is going to be best for you. Unless you want to invest in some bone conducting headphones, they just allow that you can hear what's going around for you. And the reason why they don't allow headphones is just so that you can hear the instructions from the race marshals, so that if there is a car coming, that you're aware of it. The other thing to think about when looking at routes is where you prefer to run. Do you prefer to run on the roads, or do you prefer to run in parks or on trails? So making sure that your race is, a road race if that's what you prefer, or through parks and on trails if that's where your preference is. And the final thing to look at is how the route is described. If it's described as challenging or undulating, that means there's going to be hills. If it's described as flat or PB potential, that means it's going to be flat-ish. There still might be inclines, even when they say it's flat. There's probably still going to be an incline, because you don't get completely flat unless you're running on a track. So that's something to think about, is do you want to run somewhere that's pretty flat, or do you want to have a little bit more challenge and have some hills? There's absolutely no problem with running your first race and having that be a hilly race. It's just something that you need to be aware of so that you know to put the training in. When I ran a half marathon with my mum, it was her first ever half marathon, we actually went up to the Lake District, and we knew it was going to be hilly, but we were really excited about running in the Lake Districts and running along Lake Windermere. So it might be that you think, actually, I'm up for the challenge because it's going to be a fantastic race. It's going to be beautiful. I'm really excited about running this route, even though there's going to be hills. And just know that if you do choose a hilly race, you can always walk the hills. There's plenty of people in races where people walk. And just to kind of reassure you as well, that it is okay to walk a bit in races. A lot of people will walk a bit. There'll be some people who are doing sort of walk run strategies where they run a bit and walk a bit. There'll be some people who will walk when you get to the sort of the water stations. There'll be some people who walk when you get to hills. There'll be some people who walk just because they need a little bit of a walk rest. And just because you walk a bit doesn't mean you haven't run a race. You're still running the majority of the race. You have still run a race. So don't ever think especially when you first race, don't ever think that I must be able to run the whole thing. You don't have to. You can take walk breaks, and that doesn't mean any less that you haven't run a race. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that reassures you as well. Then I want you to think about the size of the race. So races can be really small, kind of with like 60 people, or they can be really big with thousands of people. So think about what you might prefer. If you've never run a race before, then you might not know what you prefer. So it might not make a difference for your first race. But if you know that you actually find it a bit overwhelming when you're in a big, large groups of people, then maybe doing one of the really big, kind of the big city races might not be for you. You might want to choose a smaller race. Similarly, if you think that the kind of the crowd is something that's going to really get you going and get you kind of moving along, then choosing a larger race where there'll be a bit more crowds, a bit more runners along with you would probably be what you want to do. Bigger races will usually have more support, so along the route there'll be people cheering, especially if there's like lots of people raising money for charity. The charities will often have like a cheer squads along the ways, and they might have bands, they might have all sorts going along in the race. But smaller races can be surprising with the amount of support that they have as well. So just because it's a smaller race, don't think that, oh, that means it's going to be absolutely no one along the race. I've done quite a few where the races have been organised by communities where they're raising money for the local communities, and that means people will come out of their houses and kind of will be there and you know hand out sweets or water, or just be there for a cheer. So it might surprise you with the smaller races, but just so that you're prepared and you kind of think about, oh, you know, do I prefer running in a big crowd or with lots of people? Is that going to give me the buzz? Or do I prefer to run a smaller race, and I know I might be running parts of the race on my own, and actually I'm okay with that. So just be aware. And the way to work out whether it's a big race or a small race is just to look at last year's finishing times or entries to see how many people actually took part. So small races usually anything under 1,000, and then you've got your mid-size, and then you've got your really big sort of big city races. So just bear that in mind as well. And the final thing I want you to think about is cut-off times. Not every races will have cut-off times, but some do. This is the time that they expect everyone to have finished by. It's in order to kind of help their organisations to make sure that there's volunteers out there to help you with the marshalling stations and everything else. And it's to make sure that everyone stays safe on the course. Have a look at the cut-off times, and then think about whether you're going to meet it or not. And I want you to be really realistic here. So if you're running your first half marathon and the cut-off time is 3 hours, don't just think about, am I going to meet that? Am I going to get under 3 hours on a good day? Also think about, am I going to get under 3 hours on a bad day? So really be realistic. Really think about, what do I usually run? What do I run when it's a bit of a bad running day? What do I run when it's a good running day? And kind of make sure that you're going to be comfortably under that distance. The last thing you want is for you to get a DNF or a did not finish for your very first race. I want you to be comfortable with that race, and I want you to finish the race and finish really being really proud of yourself. But even if your predicted time is within that cut-off time, even if it's quite well below that cut-off time, if having a cut-off time makes you feel anxious at all, look for another race. So if you're like, well, I know I'm going to do my half marathon in 2.5 hours, you know, I'm pretty sure even on a bad day that I'll get under that, but actually I'm going to be thinking about, am I going to make that 2.5 hours? Am I going to make under that 3 hours the whole way around the course? If you know that this type of thing makes you anxious, then look for another race. There'll be plenty of other races that won't have a cut-off time. Have a look, try and find one that kind of makes you feel less anxious, that makes you feel more comfortable, because I really want you to enjoy your very first race. So there you have it, my tips on how to choose your first race. Remember, this isn't your race, whether it's a small local 5k or a big city half marathon. You want to enjoy it, and you want to feel that real good sense of accomplishment when you cross the finish line. You want to enjoy the experience as a whole and be proud of every step that you take. If you found these tips helpful, please remember to like and subscribe for more tips all about running that are going to help you get the best out of your running that you can. And if you are running your very first race, please do comment below and let me know which one it is. I'd love to cheer you along and find out how you did. And if there's anything that I haven't mentioned that you think might be a good tip for someone choosing their very first race, also please do comment below and I would love to know what you think. All right then, till next time, see you later.